In the summer of 2009, 17-year-old Lena Ward vanished during a family hike deep in the Grand Canyon. No screams, no signs of struggle, just the wind, the red rock, and the silence that followed. For 13 years, her disappearance haunted investigators and destroyed her family from the inside out. Until one morning, a park ranger discovered something buried beneath the desert dust, something that never should have survived the heat, the storms, or time itself. A camera with footage. And in the final frame, Lena stares into the lens and whispers, "They said, if I stayed, you'd forget me." The sun was cruel that day. Even in the early morning, the heat shimmered off the canyon walls, warping the air into wavering ghosts. Mara Ward squinted into the distance, one hand shading her eyes, the other clutching the granola bar Lena had just refused. Her daughter had always been headstrong, 17 and already a woman, in ways Mara wasn't ready to accept. She'd fallen behind again, always wandering to the edges, drawn to shadows, straying just far enough to worry her mother without outright rebellion. 5 minutes, Mara muttered. Just 5 minutes, Lena. She turned to help her younger son adjust his water tube, snapping the buckle tight on his chest strap. It took seconds. When she turned back around, Lena was gone. At first, it didn't register. She assumed her daughter had dipped behind one of the nearby sandstone outcroppings to take a photo or chase a better view. Lena loved angles, always looking at the world as if it were a puzzle she could unlock through her lens. But minutes stretched. No response to her name, no crunch of footsteps, no laughter. Mara's voice sharpened. "Lena? Come on, enough." Still nothing. Her heart began to pick up speed, the same feeling she'd had once, years ago, when Lena had wandered into a grocery store aisle and vanished behind the cereal boxes for 2 terrifying minutes. But this wasn't a grocery store. This was a canyon that swallowed light and echoed sound, where people got lost and never came back. By the time they called for help, the sun was high and the heat relentless. Rangers swept the area. Dogs, helicopters, dozens of volunteers. But there were no tracks, no prints, no dropped belongings, nothing. As if the earth had simply opened up and taken her. Mara stayed until nightfall, screaming her daughter's name into the canyon. But the canyon never screamed back. The desert didn't whisper, it groaned. Ranger Caleb Halloran had been walking the South Rim's inner trail alone for the better part of the morning, the soles of his boots worn smooth from years of sandstone and silence. It was supposed to be routine. Check for flash flood damage after last night's rare monsoon, record any rockfall, maybe chase off a tourist who'd wandered too far. Nothing about that stretch of canyon ever felt routine. He stopped at an outcropping, one he didn't remember, which said a lot considering he'd hiked this section at least a dozen times. A fresh landslide had shifted the terrain, toppling loose rock into a disordered pile like a collapsed altar. Something glinted beneath the rubble. He crouched down. Half buried under silt and cracked limestone was an old camera, black plastic, sun-bleached, its once rubber grip now peeling. He brushed away the dust slowly, reverently, like it might vanish. It looked ancient, early 2000s maybe. Sand had eaten into every crevice. The viewfinder was shattered, but the body remained intact. He turned it over. The logo was nearly erased by sun and time, but the memory card compartment, miraculously, was still shut. Caleb's breath caught. Cameras like this didn't just show up out here, 20 miles from any marked trail, surrounded by nothing but scrub brush and silence. His fingers moved with instinct. The latch popped. Inside, the memory card was still in place. He stood up slowly, the heat pressing in around him like a warning. This part of the canyon had never been searched, not thoroughly. It was far from where people assumed the girl had gone missing all those years ago. "Ward," he whispered, not even realizing he'd said it aloud. He didn't know how he remembered her name. 17, disappeared on a family trip, no trace, no clues. Just a photo that still hung on the bulletin board at Ranger HQ, sun-faded, forgotten. But now, Caleb Halloran held the first trace of her in over a decade. He didn't know it yet, but what he'd just found wouldn't bring closure. It would unearth something far darker. Back at the ranger station, the hum of old equipment and flickering fluorescent lights felt like ghosts pressing against Caleb's skin. The Grand Canyon always carried its own silence, but this was heavier. He inserted the weathered memory card into the outdated media reader. He didn't trust the cloud, not for this. The laptop sputtered as the drive spun to life. A list of video files appeared, most unreadable, corrupted, unnamed, just strings of numbers and timestamps from over a decade ago. But one file opened. It was shaky at first. Trees, juniper and pinyon, flashing by in blurs, the sound of frantic breathing, dust. A girl's voice whispering, "It's still following me." Caleb leaned in, then the camera steadied. Lena Ward came into frame. 17, just like the photo. Her face was scratched, sunburned, streaked with tears and blood. Her hair was pulled back, messy. Her lips cracked. She was hiding under something, overhanging rock, maybe a shallow cave. Dim light made her look half-faded, like a ghost trying to stay visible. "If you're seeing this, if anyone's seeing this," she began, her voice trembling, "please tell my mom I didn't run, I didn't fall, I didn't leave." A sound off camera, distant crunching, made her eyes widen. She pulled the camera close. "They're watching us," she whispered, barely audible. "Not just me, others. We found something we weren't supposed to." A sharp static crackled through the audio. Then came the scream, not from her, a man maybe, from deep in the canyon, distant but chilling. Lena flinched. The camera dropped, landed sideways, boots passed in front of the lens, bare feet, not hers, covered in red dust, human, but not. Then black. 3 seconds of corrupted static, then silence. Caleb stared at the screen, heart pounding. He didn't know what haunted him more, the desperation in Lena's voice or the unmistakable terror in her eyes. He replayed the last line over and over. "They're watching us," not were, are. Mara Ward had learned how to live in pieces. 13 years after Lena vanished, she still set a second place at the breakfast table some mornings without realizing it. Still glanced toward the hallway when the floor creaked. Still left the porch light on when the wind howled through Flagstaff. Not because she believed her daughter would come home, but because she didn't know how to stop hoping. The phone rang just after 7 a.m. Mara was pouring coffee, the mug trembling slightly in her grip. She stared at the caller ID, U.S. Park Service. She didn't answer right away. People didn't call this long after a disappearance unless something had changed. Mara's knees weakened and she sat slowly, like her body knew, before her mind did. "Hello?" Her voice was barely there. "Mrs. Ward?" The voice on the other end was cautious. A man's voice. "This is Ranger Caleb Halloran with the National Park Service. I believe I may have found something connected to your daughter." Time stopped. The air in the kitchen thickened. Mara blinked, her heart thrashing behind her ribs. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" "We recovered a camera, a digital one, near the Kaibab Plateau, an area that wasn't part of the original search zone. We believe it belonged to Lena." Mara pressed a hand to her mouth. Tears welled up before she even understood why. There's footage from shortly after the time of her disappearance. A pause. She's on it, speaking, alive. The cup slipped from her other hand and shattered on the tile. She didn't move, didn't flinch. "You're telling me my daughter, she was alive after she disappeared?" "Yes, ma'am. I think you should come see it for yourself." Outside the window, the morning looked like any other. Birds on wires, clouds brushing the San Francisco peaks. But Mara Ward was already falling back into the canyon. 13 years of silence were about to speak. 2009. The day before everything changed. The sky was painted in layers of gold and pink as the Ward family pulled into the small Grand Canyon campground. Dust curled beneath their tires, and Lena Ward leaned her head against the backseat window, pretending not to hear her parents argue. Again. "It's just a trail, Mara," her father snapped, unloading their gear. "People do it every day." "She's 17, not invincible," Mara shot back, eyes flicking to Lena, who quickly looked away. Lena hated this version of them. She hated how the canyon stretched between her parents like a metaphor. She hated that she was stuck here for 3 more days. The trip had been Mara's idea, one last family vacation before Lena started college applications. But even Lena could feel the cracks in everything they weren't saying. Later, after the fire was lit and her little brother fell asleep in the tent, Lena slipped away. Just a walk, she told herself, just to breathe. She didn't expect to find anyone else awake. He was crouched near the cliff's edge, flicking a Zippo lighter open and closed. About 19. Ragged flannel shirt, sun-darkened skin, hands that looked like they knew the canyon better than maps ever could. "You're not supposed to be out here alone," he said without turning. "And yet," she replied, smiling. He turned then. His eyes were amber in the firelight. "Name's Jude," he said. "And Lena." They didn't talk much, just walked together in the soft hush of desert night, the kind that made you feel like time had stopped. Jude told her he worked nearby helping with park maintenance, but didn't say much else. At one point he paused and pointed toward a rock formation in the distance. "See that ridge?" he asked. "Locals say there's something buried beneath it. Old trail, long closed off. Cursed, if you believe in that kind of thing." Lena smirked. "Do you?" He looked at her, serious now. "Some places don't want to be found." Then he was gone, slipping back into the darkness as quietly as he came. Lena returned to camp, heart pounding, for reasons she couldn't name. By morning, she wouldn't remember his last words clearly, but she'd feel them in her bones. Ranger Halloran sat alone in the park's dim operations center, the footage looping silently on a cracked government-issued monitor. He'd watched it 10 times, maybe more. But this time his focus was different, not on Lena's face or the terror in her voice, but on the numbers, the metadata. He pulled up the file's properties again. The video was time-stamped July 14th, 2009, 3 days after Lena Ward's disappearance. 3 days after the official search was called off. And it shouldn't have been there. Even more troubling, the camera's GPS signature. It placed the file's movement not in the canyon, but uploaded through an external device, likely a laptop. A signal pinged from just outside the North Rim Visitor Center. Someone had connected to the camera after Lena vanished. Someone had accessed it and never said a word. Halloran leaned back, rubbing the back of his neck, his skin buzzing. That trail had been cold for 13 years, but now he wasn't looking at a tragic disappearance. He was looking at a cover-up. He reached for the desk phone and dialed the Flagstaff field office. "This is Ranger Halloran. I need to submit a formal incident report, requesting a forensic tech for recovered digital media. Possible new evidence in the Lena Ward case?" There was a pause on the other end. "I thought that was closed," came the response. "Family stopped pushing. Everyone stopped pushing." "Not anymore," Halloran said flatly. He hung up and stared out the window at the canyon's distant edge. Below, red shadows were lengthening across rock like blood, sinking into sand. In the hallway, the old caseboard still hung, yellowed files, grainy photos, a map dotted with forgotten pins. Lena's face was up there. Her eyes, even frozen in time, seemed to beg for something deeper. Halloran walked to it, grabbed a red marker, and circled the trailhead nearest to the GPS ping. Then he grabbed a new pin and pushed it in, hard. They called it a suicide, but no one really knew for sure. 6 years after Lena vanished, her old boyfriend, Eli Mercer, was found dead in his studio apartment in Sedona. A self-inflicted overdose, no signs of struggle, no note at first. Just silence, paint-stained walls, and a canvas still wet with black. But in the drawer beneath his bed, tucked between his sketchbooks and a cracked Polaroid of Lena, was a page from his journal. One line was circled over and over, gouged into the paper with the weight of a man, unraveling. "I buried what I knew. It wasn't enough." Mara Ward had read those words only once. The detective showed them to her during a brief follow-up after Eli's death. They called it a dead end. Mara called it something else. Proof. She remembered how Lena used to describe Eli back in high school, quiet, brilliant, like he carried every thought like a secret. He had gone numb after Lena's disappearance, quit college, dropped out of sight. His art grew darker with each year, haunting sketches of red cliffs, hollow-eyed silhouettes, and crude renderings of the same ridge again and again. The one Lena had photographed the day she disappeared. Back in the present, Ranger Halloran read the same note, copied from the original police file. The handwriting was shaky, frayed around the edges, like it had been written by someone at the edge of something vast and unspeakable. He reread the final phrase. It wasn't enough. Not enough to save her? Not enough to tell the truth? Or not enough to stop whatever had taken her? Halloran looked again at Eli's last painting, preserved in a file photo, a crude red mountain under a black sky. In the center, a figure, half human, half shadow, stood beside a small girl, holding something that looked like a lens, a camera. The chill that slid down Halloran's spine had nothing to do with the canyon winds. Something had been buried, and someone had died trying to forget it. He called himself Red, but his real name was Nathaniel Kane. In 2009, he was a wilderness guide subcontracted by a Grand Canyon tour outfit. Freelance, charming, a little too tan, a little too eager. He was the one who led the Ward family on their day hike. The last to see Lena alive. At the time, no one pressed too hard. He'd reported her missing immediately, claimed she'd wandered off during a water break, said he looked everywhere. But Mara had never believed him. Something about his voice on the news clip, detached, rehearsed, rattled her. A year after Lena vanished, Red was arrested for assaulting a solo hiker near Glen Canyon. The charges stuck. He served 18 months, then disappeared from public view, slipping off the grid like a man who'd learned how to vanish. Ranger Halloran tracked him down in a rust-bit trailer parked on BLM land, just outside Marble Canyon. The wheels were flat, the satellite dish dead, but smoke curled from the stovepipe. Someone was home. Halloran knocked once. Red opened the door shirtless, sunburned, cigarette dangling from his lip. His eyes narrowed the moment he saw the uniform. "Park Service don't usually come out this far," he said flatly. "I'm not here to talk about permits." Halloran's voice was calm. "I'm here about Lena Ward." Red's expression didn't change, but something in his stance stiffened. Long time ago. Not long enough. Inside the trailer, the air was stale with burnt coffee and dried blood on old maps. On the table sat a drawer, detached from anything. It was filled with hand-sketched topography, color-coded pins, and faded photographs. Halloran saw something that made his gut twist. A copy of the very ridge Lena had filmed near, circled in red ink. "You kept maps of that area." Red didn't answer. "You said she went missing near the rim," Halloran said to him. "But that spot is 20 miles off route." Red lit a match, held it to a cigarette, and muttered, "Not every trail's on the map, Ranger." "Then tell me what's out there." Red exhaled smoke. "Nothing you want to find." The sun was bleeding into the canyon by the time Halloran reached the dry creek bed. The landscape here was older, untouched. No tourist footprints, no trail markers. Just the wind and the haunting groan of stone echoing through the chasm like the ghosts of those who'd gone missing. He hadn't planned to go this far off-grid, but something in Red's words, "Not every trail's on the map," had gnawed at him. This ridge wasn't on any official route. No records, no maintenance, just whispers. Halloran moved carefully down the embankment, boots crunching over fractured shale and centuries-old dust. And then he saw it, something half-buried in the red dirt. A glint of metal. He crouched, brushing the earth aside with gloved fingers. It was a bracelet, rusted, bent, the kind sold in canyon gift shops over a decade ago. Engraved on the inside, Lena. His heart caught. He turned it over, the edges worn with time and weather, but the name was unmistakable. This wasn't a replica. This had been hers. Just below it, he noticed something else. Bones. Sun-bleached, small. A human wrist, or what remained of it. For a long moment he stared. Was this it? Was this her? He called it in. But hours later, after the evidence had been retrieved and rushed to the field lab, the results came back from a rushed preliminary scan. Female, adult, likely mid-30s at time of death. Not Lena. Halloran sat on the hood of his truck long after dark, staring out at the emptiness around him. Coyotes howled somewhere distant. The sky turned black enough to show the Milky Way. If Lena's bracelet was here, and someone else's bones were here, then someone else had died where Lena once stood, and she had seen it coming. Back at the station, Halloran logged the find as evidence. He also added something else to the file. Site may be burial ground. Victim number 2 confirmed. Lena not yet located. Somewhere out here, nature had been watching, and it had begun at last to speak. The Grand Canyon was a monument to deep time, to ancient silences, but underneath it, a different silence had taken shape. A pattern. Halloran stared at the crime board he'd pieced together in his office, half sanctioned, half not. He'd drawn a red triangle between 3 points in the northern quadrant of the park, each connected by something more than topography. Loss, Lena Ward, 2009, Chloe Jensen, 2001, Amber Reyes, 2014. 3 girls, 3 disappearances, all under 21. All vanished within a 15-mile radius of the Kaibab Ridge, an area once used by indigenous tribes, later closed to tourists due to erosion risks. An area the Park Service had quietly classified as off-limits. No one had ever connected the cases. They'd been logged in separate jurisdictions, different rangers, different years, different excuses. Heat stroke, wandered off, suicide. But Halloran saw it now, the shape the canyon had carved. Chloe had vanished during a school hiking trip. Her body was never found, just her boots and a single braid of blonde hair tied to a juniper branch. Amber had come to hike solo, Instagrammed her tent. Then, nothing. The last photo she uploaded was of a strange ridge under sunset light, captioned, "Feels like I'm being watched." Halloran printed it. 3 girls, different ages, backgrounds, hometowns. The only thing they had in common was this place, and the fact that no one ever looked deep enough. Until now. He called in a favor from a retired ranger who'd worked the 2001 case. They spoke over a poor phone connection, crackling like fire. "You really think it's the same guy?" the old ranger asked. "I think it's not a guy at all," Halloran said. "I think it's a place." There was silence, then a sigh. "You're chasing ghosts, son." Halloran looked again at the printed photo of Amber's final upload. In the bottom corner, partially obscured by shadow, was a figure, out of focus, watching. He clipped it to the board beside Lena's. The canyon didn't take people. It chose them. The map was more like a confession. Ranger Halloran laid it flat beneath the desk lamp in his cabin, smoothing out the creases with trembling hands. He'd stolen it. No, requisitioned it. From Red's trailer during a bathroom break the man never actually took. Red had drawn over an official topographic survey, but it was what he'd added that mattered. Faded ink lines crawling across the canyon like veins, diverging from marked trails into shadowed gorges, uncharted hollows, and finally a cluster of crude symbols inside a red circle. Just beside them, 13th mile. Repeated, underlined, then circled again. Halloran stared at it, brow furrowed. There was no 13th mile on that route. The official trail ended at mile 11 with no viable terrain beyond. Landslides, washed-out paths, a cliff face deemed too dangerous to climb without ropes. The Park Service had closed that portion years ago, but Red had marked something there, a cave system, hand-sketched and filled in with crimson pencil, dots leading toward a symbol that looked like an eye, etched with almost disturbing precision. Beside it, written in shaky block print, "Entrance, keep out, you don't come back from this." Halloran leaned back, blood humming in his ears. The smell of old ink and desert dust filled the air. It felt like the page itself was breathing. He picked up the blacklight he used for wildlife surveys and swept it over the paper. That's when he saw it. In the margins, faint but unmistakable, dark splotches, blood, dried, years old, speckled in irregular drops across the lower edge of the map, like whoever had held it was bleeding while mapping. Halloran's throat went dry. Was this Red's blood or someone else's? And why, in the far corner, had someone scribbled 4 chilling words in red ballpoint? She's still down there. He didn't sleep that night, didn't even try, just stared at that eye-shaped cave and wondered if it had ever blinked. The air grew colder the deeper they went. Lena's breath echoed against the stone walls, shallow and hesitant. Behind her, Jude held the flashlight low, its beam cutting a trembling path through ancient dust and roots that hung like forgotten threads. The entrance was nearly invisible from the ridge above, tucked beneath an outcropping hidden by scrub and thyme. "How did you even find this?" she whispered, her voice almost reverent. Jude didn't answer right away. He just kept walking, his silhouette oddly still. Finally he said, "Red showed me. Years ago. He said no one comes this far anymore." Lena stopped. "Red? The guide?" Jude nodded. "He said the tribes wouldn't go near it, called it cursed, off limits even before the Park Service was a thing." The cave opened into a chamber, vaulted like a cathedral, wide and deathly silent. It smelled like damp stone, rot, and something older, something metallic. That's when she saw it. Etched into the far wall just above a shelf of limestone was a figure, not carved, burned. The stone itself had blackened around the form as though lightning had struck it into existence. It was human-shaped, but wrong. Its arms too long, its head too narrow, and no face. Just a smooth, blank oval. "What the hell?" Lena stepped closer. Jude didn't move. His light was fixed on the floor now, on something she hadn't noticed. A second figure, smaller, sketched with what looked like old blood, a childlike shape, drawn reaching toward the faceless one. Lena's breath hitched. "Why would someone draw this here?" Jude's voice was distant. "Not a drawing, a warning." The air suddenly felt heavier, like the cave had lungs and was holding a breath. Lena turned back toward the tunnel, but for a second, just one, she thought she saw something in the blackness ahead. Not movement, just presence. She grabbed Jude's hand, her fingers ice cold. "We shouldn't be here." He didn't disagree, but neither of them turned around. The file lay open, but Halloran wasn't reading it anymore. The words blurred. Lena's name, the forensic notes, the map. It all began to collapse inward, swallowed by a memory he hadn't touched in years. Her name was Lily. 15 years ago she was just a kid, his kid sister. 10 years old with tangled hair, scraped knees, and a laugh that could break the quiet of any room. That summer, their parents took them camping in the Wintas. It was supposed to be simple. A weekend, family time. He remembered the exact moment. He'd turned away for a second, just long enough to tie his boot. When he looked up, she was gone, just like Lena. The search lasted days, dogs, helicopters, volunteers combing the woods, but they never found her. No body, no clothing, no trace. Just one shoe, found at the base of a ravine. The coroner never made a declaration. Officially, she was missing, presumed dead. But Halloran never stopped wondering, never stopped feeling like it was his fault. That guilt grew into obsession, then into direction. He joined the Park Service, first as a seasonal recruit, then permanent ranger, search and rescue, then law enforcement. The canyon had a way of calling lost people, and he wanted to be the one who answered. But no one ever asked him why he stayed so long in the Northern Territories, why he volunteered for cold cases, why the folder on his desk was always open to a face frozen in time. Lena's photo, age 17, wide smile, wind-blown hair, stared back at him. She wasn't just a case. She was Lily, all over again. And maybe if he found out what happened to Lena, he could rewrite the ending. The clock ticked louder. He picked up the map again, eyes drawn to the words burned into the cave symbol. She's still down there. So was he in a way. Still down there, searching. It came through the radio at 2:17 a.m., a whisper threading through static, so faint it might have been wind. Ranger Halloran sat up from the cot, heart pounding. The signal had no business being active. The canyon's depths swallowed most frequencies, and no one was logged to be in the backcountry tonight. Still, the handheld crackled again. "Still here?" He froze. Not a full voice, just a fragment. A girl's voice, hoarse and distant, like it had been dragged across 13 years of silence. "Still here?" The same words, repeating. Halloran grabbed the radio and switched to emergency band. "This is Park Ranger Halloran. Repeat transmission. Identify yourself." Silence. Then, "Help!" He dropped the receiver. The voice had weight to it, not a recording, not a glitch. There was exhaustion in it. Strain, like someone at the edge of breath, barely clinging to consciousness, barely clinging to being. He replayed the signal through his field unit's recorder, trying to isolate the background. There was echo, cave acoustics, and a low dripping sound. Water, maybe, or something thicker. He marked the timestamp, location, and signal strength, then loaded the spectrogram. The signal triangulated to Zone 7B, right near the 13th mile, the same unmarked region from Red's map, the same place where Lena's bracelet was found, the same dead zone search teams had always avoided, citing terrain instability and the risk of rockfall. No official transmitter was listed in that radius, which meant someone was broadcasting manually, or had been, until now. The voice didn't repeat again. Dead air returned, thick and total. But Halloran couldn't shake the final whisper from the tape. Not just what it said, but how it sounded. It didn't just say, "Still here." It pleaded it, like a prayer turned inside out. He picked up his gear and loaded his sidearm. If she was down there, alive, this was the first proof, or the cruelest echo the canyon had ever thrown back. The descent into the 13th mile felt like crossing into another world, one untouched by time and unseen by mercy. Ranger Halloran's boots hit uneven stone as he squeezed through the narrow rock slit Red had marked on the map. The flashlight trembled in his grip, not from fear, he told himself, but from the steep climb, the sweat stinging his eyes, the unstable footing. But the air changed here, denser, damper, almost metallic. He crouched through a tight tunnel and emerged into a chamber. Then he stopped breathing. The flashlight beam swept the space like a searchlight and revealed bones. Hundreds, human and animal, tangled together in deliberate patterns, spirals, crosses, concentric rings. Some were clean and sun-bleached, others were still laced with sinew. A child's ribcage was woven into the remains of a deer skull, antlers split and sharpened into points. Bones were arranged vertically against the walls, stacked like a warning tower. Not a burial site, a message. At the far end of the cavern, a crude altar stood, built from vertebrae and femurs, crowned with a cracked human skull. Scrawled behind it in dried pigment or blood was a glyph, the faceless figure from Lena's cave memory, arms wide like an invitation or a threat. Halloran's breath caught. He moved slowly now, the crunch of bone underfoot like glass shattering in a cathedral. Every step echoed too far, like the walls were listening. A long femur bore faint scratch marks. He knelt. Not scratches, letters, etched deep into the bone's curve. "I saw her." Halloran staggered back, bile rising in his throat. That wasn't just a message, that was a dying act. Someone, probably one of the girls, had tried to record the truth with their last strength. The silence was deafening. Then, just behind him, a whisper. No words, just breathe. He spun the flashlight toward the tunnel. Nothing. But when he turned back, the skull atop the altar had shifted. Now it was facing him. Mara froze at the sound of tires on gravel. It was nearly midnight. She hadn't heard a car approach, just the low hum of an engine dying and the clunk of a door swinging open. She peered through the window, the porch light flickering like it had caught its breath mid-sentence. A shadow leaned against the mailbox, then stepped into the light. Jude, older now, gaunt, hollow-eyed like he hadn't slept in years, mud smeared across his sleeves, his hoodie soaked, as if he'd come crawling out of the earth. Mara's knees buckled. She gripped the edge of the counter to stay upright. He was dead, declared lost, presumed drowned in a flash flood a decade ago. Gone the same summer as Lena. She opened the door slowly, heart thudding. "Jude?" He didn't answer right away, just stared at her, like trying to recognize a face in a dream he wasn't sure he was still having. Then, "I shouldn't have come." "You're alive. Where have you been?" she whispered, stepping forward. "Where's Lena?" His eyes flinched. "I know where she went," he said, voice cracking like dry leaves, "but we never should have followed." Mara's throat went dry. "Followed who?" He shook his head violently. "It wasn't a person, not really. It's something that waits. It watches you first, makes you think you found something sacred, makes you trust it." She stared at him. "Are you talking about the cave?" He looked up, eyes suddenly wild. "It changes when you're inside. It changes you." She backed away, heart racing. "What are you saying?" Jude took a step forward, trembling. "She called to us. It didn't start with Lena. It won't end with her." His fingers clutched something in his coat pocket. "I brought it back." "What?" He held it out. A photo. Torn, blood-stained. Lena, aged gaunt, her mouth open in a silent scream. Behind her, the faceless figure, shadowed in the rock. Mara dropped the photo. Jude whispered, "She's still down there, but she's not the same." The historian's voice was steady, but something in his eyes flickered, like he wasn't just reciting a myth, but remembering it. "They call them the Ta Dinee," he said, "the Echo people." Mara sat across from him in the tribal archives office, an unmarked building on the edge of the reservation, filled with brittle pages, old tapes, and heavier truths. The Navajo man's name was Thomas Nez, a retired anthropologist and oral historian. He hadn't wanted to speak at first. But when Mara showed him the photo, Lena in that cave, the figure behind her, he went silent. Then he unlocked the cabinet. "They're not ghosts, not demons, not quite," he said, unfolding a hand-drawn map, older than anything Red had ever seen. "They mimic. That's their gift, their curse. They find the lonely, the lost, the ones wandering too far from the path." He tapped the map. The cave was marked, no modern names, just symbols, warnings. "Some say the Echo people are the memory of something ancient, something buried when the canyon was still young. They draw people in with voices that sound familiar. A sister, a daughter, a friend." Mara leaned forward. "And then what happens?" He looked at her with quiet pity. "They're never seen again. Or if they are, they've changed. Emptied." She swallowed hard. "And the bones? Arranged like symbols?" Thomas nodded. "The ones who saw and tried to resist. It said the Echo people don't kill, they convince. The ritual isn't for death, it's for sacrifice of self, a shedding of memory, will, soul." He slid a photocopy toward her, an ancient petroglyph. A faceless figure, arms outstretched. "They don't take your body," he said quietly. "They take what makes it yours." Mara felt a chill grip her spine. "And once you hear your name whispered from the dark," he added, eyes distant, "you're already halfway gone." She looked down at Lena's photo again. Not just a warning, a transformation. And maybe a summoning. The footage was grainy, distorted by low light and heat shimmer, but Halloran couldn't stop watching it. It was from a wildlife trail cam near the eastern rim, 13th mile boundary, captured 2 weeks ago, but only just flagged by the AI scanner. The system had detected anomalous human presence. He hit play again. At first, the image showed nothing unusual: brush swaying, a fox darting into frame, the wind stirring loose dust. Then, movement. A figure, thin, staggering, barefoot, a girl. Halloran froze the frame and zoomed in. Her face was blurred by motion, but something about the posture, the shape of her jaw, the tilt of her shoulders, snapped straight through him. He enhanced the time code, cross-referenced the coordinates. The girl was walking from the canyon. He ran the image through facial match software. 91% Porti, Lena Ward. His pulse thundered in his ears. 13 years gone, no body, no evidence. And now she was walking like she'd just stepped out of a dream that hadn't finished with her yet. But something was wrong. Halloran played the footage a fifth time. This time, he slowed it down further, frame by frame. At the 12-second mark, as Lena turns toward the camera, something shifts in the shadows behind her. A second figure. He paused, rewound, zoomed. It stood partially obscured by brush, no details visible, no face. Just a long-limbed silhouette, as still as the rock behind it. And yet, the figure seemed to lean forward ever so slightly, as if noticing the camera, or noticing him. Halloran felt his chest tighten. He flicked between the two frames, Lena in one, the figure in the next, and for a brief moment, in one blurred transition, they overlapped. It wasn't just a person following her. It looked like she had become part of it, or it had become part of her. Halloran shut off the monitor and stared at the dark screen. What if Lena wasn't just still out there? What if she was already something else? Mara stood in the doorway of Caleb's cabin, arms crossed against the night chill, but it wasn't the cold that made her shake. Inside, Caleb sat hunched over the dining table, nursing the same cup of coffee he'd poured an hour ago. They hadn't spoken since Jude left. The photo still lay between them, Lena's hollowed face haunting the grain of the wood. Mara finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I told her to disappear." Caleb looked up slowly, eyes bloodshot. "What?" "That night," she said. "The last night. We were supposed to go hiking, just the two of us. But we fought. God, we fought like it was the end of the world." She stepped into the cabin, each footfall heavy with guilt. She wanted to drop out of school, said it was all fake, her friends, her future, everything we planned for her. She was obsessed with that canyon by then, always talking about how it made her feel seen, like something in it understood her. Caleb's hands tightened around the cup. "I told her she was selfish," Mara continued, tears building. "I told her she was ungrateful, that if she wanted to vanish so badly, maybe she should." Her voice cracked on the word. "I didn't mean it. I swear I didn't. But I said it, and then I turned my back." She collapsed into the chair across from him, burying her face in her hands. Caleb didn't speak at first, just looked at her like someone watching a building collapse and knowing there's nothing he can do. "We were both broken back then," he said quietly. "You with the grief, me with the guilt. We didn't lose her that day. We were already losing her for months." Mara looked up, mascara bleeding at the edges. What if she heard me? What if that's why she walked into that canyon alone? Caleb stared at the photo, at the figure behind her. "She didn't walk in alone," he said. And neither of them looked away from the truth anymore. Jude's flashlight barely cut through the murk as he led Halloran deep into the backcountry, boots slipping on gravel and centuries-old dust. He hadn't spoken much since they left the trailhead, just walked like a man who had memorized the route by guilt alone. The moon hung behind thin clouds, offering just enough light to shape shadows into watchers. At the base of a cragged bluff, he stopped. "There," he whispered. Halloran turned. A jagged crevice split the canyon wall, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. No signage, no natural path, just an opening like a torn seam in the earth. "This is where she went in," Jude said. His voice sounded like gravel in his throat. Halloran stepped closer. "And you?" Jude's jaw clenched. "I ran." He crouched near the entrance, fingers brushing the dust-caked stone. "We found it by accident. I didn't think it was real. Lena, she said she'd heard something in her dreams. A song." He looked up at Halloran, eyes haunted. "She said the cave had been calling her." Halloran's breath caught. "I followed her down," Jude continued, voice shaking now. "It was quiet at first, too quiet, but then the walls, they started whispering, like they knew my name, like they remembered me." "What did you see?" Jude swallowed. "Shapes, faces in the rock, but wrong, like something wearing human memories like a costume. Lena kept walking deeper. She didn't even hesitate." He looked away. "Then I saw her stop. She turned around and smiled at me, but it wasn't her smile. It was like she was trying to remember how to move her own face." Halloran stepped forward. "Why didn't you go after her?" Jude didn't answer. He just said, "She told me I didn't belong there, that if I took one more step, I'd never come back the same." Halloran stared into the black slit of the cave. It wasn't just fear on Jude's face. It was shame, and something worse, the knowledge that whatever Lena had become, she had chosen it. Halloran ducked beneath the stone lip of the crevice, stepping into darkness so thick it felt alive. The moment his boots hit the cave floor, sound vanished. No wind, no echo of movement. Just a silence so total it seemed to press inward, like breath held too long. He took one cautious step, then another. Then, "Ben?" He froze. The voice didn't come from behind him or ahead. It slid sideways, like it had seeped from the walls. Young, soft, uncertain. His sister's voice. He hadn't heard it in nearly 20 years, not since the accident. He turned toward the sound, the flashlight trembling in his grip. "Anna?" Nothing. Just rock. Just shadow. Then it came again, closer, clearer, warm with memory. "Why didn't you come with me?" His knees nearly buckled. That was what she'd said the night she died, just before slipping beneath the ice. She'd looked back. He hadn't followed. Halloran squeezed his eyes shut. It's not real, just the cave, just the dark, playing tricks on him. But the air changed, cooler, heavier, and then a new sound. A girl's voice, whispering, broken, repeating, like an old recording looped through time. "Don't let it in. Don't answer it. Don't let it know your name." Halloran followed the voice deeper into the passage. The words grew fainter, urgent, pleading. "Don't let it in. Don't let it—" Static, then silence. His flashlight flickered, and then a rush of cold wind blasted from the depths, like the cave exhaled. The walls pulsed, almost imperceptibly, and for just a moment, in the edge of his light, he saw her. Lena, standing 20 feet ahead, eyes black, mouth open, but unmoving, like a photo held in breathless pause. He stepped toward her. She blinked, and vanished. The silence that followed was no longer empty. It was watching. The storm was coming fast. From the ranger outpost, Mara could see the clouds crawling over the canyon like a bruise stretching across the sky. The radio crackled with urgency, flash flood warnings, rockfall risk, trail closures. This place didn't just test the lost. It devoured the unprepared. She zipped her jacket tighter and turned to Red. How long before they shut it all down? "By morning," he said, jaw tight. "Officially, but realistically, less than 24 hours. After that, the seasonal wash closes access to the eastern ridge. We'll be cut off until spring." Mara glanced at the trail map spread across the hood of the Jeep. Halloran's last check-in had been 5 hours ago, just a single ping from his sat phone before it went dead. "Is there any way we can get to him faster?" Red hesitated, then jabbed a finger at a narrow offshoot. Old mining trail. Dangerous as hell, washed out in places, but it'll shave off 3 hours. Mara nodded. "Then that's the way." She turned to grab her pack when Red touched her arm. "You sure you want to go in there? I know this place. It's not just wild. It's wrong." Mara looked back at the canyon. It felt like it was breathing, alive in a way that had nothing to do with nature. "My daughter might still be in there," she said. "And if she is, she's waited 13 years for someone to come back for her." Red didn't argue. They drove fast, kicking up gravel as they descended the narrowing road toward the edge of nowhere. Over the radio, another report came through. "Canyon closes at dawn. All backcountry operations must cease. I repeat, evacuate before sunrise." Mara's grip tightened on the dash as thunder rolled overhead. They had 1 day left. To find Halloran, to find Lena, before the canyon buried its secrets again. Halloran's fingers trembled as he pried the rusted thermos open. The metal was wedged into a rock crevice, tucked behind a boulder, deep within the cave, hidden like a secret that wanted to be found. The lid creaked as he unscrewed it. Inside, wrapped in layers of waxed canvas and brittle cloth, was another tape. Smaller than the first, unlabeled except for one word scratched faintly into the plastic. Forget. He slid the cassette into the recorder, pressed play. For a moment, only static. Then her voice. Lena, raw, tired, older. If you're hearing this, it means I disobeyed them. Again. Halloran leaned closer. The sound bounced off the cave walls like her words were trapped in the stone itself. They said, if I stayed, you'd forget me. That the world would. That's the price. It's how they keep this place hidden. You walk out, and it all fades, like a dream you can't name. A pause, breathing, shaky. But you came back. You came back anyway. I didn't think anyone would. He closed his eyes, chest heavy. It's not just a place, it's them. They take pieces of you, little by little. Memories, names, sound, until there's nothing left but silence. I've seen others lose their own faces trying to remember who they were. The tape cracked with interference. I thought I could resist. I thought love would anchor me, but it only made me easier to hurt. Another pause, a shift in her tone. I remember you, Mom. I remember Jude. I remember the fox at the rim and the way the wind sounded that day. I remember how the world felt right before I fell away from it. Silence, then barely audible. If I forget myself, promise you won't. Not all of me, not what I was before the canyon spoke my name. Click. The tape ended. Halloran sat in the dark, the recorder still humming. Not just a message, a goodbye. But not to him. To the girl she used to be. The chamber opened up like a wound in the earth. Halloran stepped inside, blinking as his eyes adjusted to the strange light, muted and pale, yet with no clear source. The air was colder here, weighted with something that felt older than time. He saw it before he understood it. A circle of wildflowers, brittle and bone-dry, arranged with unnatural precision in the center of the room. At the heart of it, a shirt, torn, faded blue, stained with something dark that had long since dried. Blood. His breath caught. It was Lena's shirt. The same one she'd worn in the last photo before she vanished, the one from the overlook, arms wrapped around her mother's waist, smiling into the sun. Here, it looked like a relic, like an offering. He knelt slowly, not daring to touch it. The flowers were desert-born, ghost daisies, cliff rose, paintbrush, collected from across the canyon. But their arrangement wasn't random. It formed a ring around the shirt, protecting it, or imprisoning it. On the cave wall beside the makeshift altar, a symbol had been carved deep into the stone, a perfect spiral, interwoven with fine lines, like a timepiece without hands. It radiated inward, pulling the eye to its center. Halloran reached out and traced it with his fingers, and the moment he touched it, a sound rippled through the air, not a scream, not a voice, a memory. Lena's laughter echoing from nowhere, then the crying of a child, then nothing. He staggered back. Whatever this place was, it wasn't just a tomb or shrine, it was a boundary. And Lena hadn't just vanished into the wild. She had been transformed by something that remembered time differently, something that marked her not as lost, but as chosen. The spiral pulsed faintly under his fingers, like it was waiting. And suddenly, Halloran understood. This wasn't a message. It was an invitation. Halloran's hands trembled as he flipped through the battered ranger logbook Red had given him before the descent, entries spanning decades, some water-damaged, some crossed out in red pen, others written in frantic, looping scrawl. A name appeared again and again, the Vanishers. 1976, 1983, 1991. 2004, Rangers had whispered about them for years, a fringe survivalist group that moved through the canyon like ghosts. No official record, no confirmed sightings, just scattered clues, shoes left in circles of ash, stone totems with faces carved into them, children's voices heard in places no trail ever reached. They weren't just hiding. They believed in disappearing, worshipping the concept of vanishing not as death, but as evolution. A handwritten note had been tucked into the margins of one page, unsigned. They call it shedding. You give up your name, your image, your memories, you become less and therefore more. light enough to leave the world behind. Halloran turned the page and stopped. A photo had been stapled to it, grainy, faded, but unmistakable. Lena standing among them, her face thinner, hair longer. She looked older than 17, but younger than now. Her eyes were distant, yet calm. Around her were 5 figures, hooded, masked with painted bark and cloth, standing in a clearing somewhere deep in the canyon. Someone had scribbled beneath the photo, "Taken 2013, unverified, possible Vanisher recruitment site." Halloran pressed the photo flat, heart hammering. She hadn't been alone. And she hadn't just survived. She'd been taken in. Red had warned him once, "Some people don't get lost. They choose to disappear. You just don't always know why until it's too late to stop them." Halloran's flashlight flickered. The air in the cave thickened again, like breathing inside a memory. A symbol was etched below the photo, the same spiral he'd seen carved into the rock chamber. It wasn't just the canyon that had changed Lena. She'd joined something, and now the spiral was calling again. This time, not just for her, but for him. The first thing Halloran noticed was the silence. Then the pain. His wrists were raw, bound with something fibrous and coarse. Not rope, but twisted sinew. He was on his knees deep inside a stone cavern lit by flickering lanterns that gave off no heat. Shadows danced along the jagged walls, stretching unnaturally long. They stood in a circle around him, 8 figures draped in earthen robes, stitched from hides, each wearing a different mask. Some bark, others bone, one carved from obsidian. None had eyes behind the masks, just black hollows where light should have been. They didn't speak. They stared. Then one stepped forward. In his hands was a book. Halloran's stomach twisted the moment he saw it. The cover was stitched flesh, tanned and yellowed, a crude spiral carved into its front. It was warm to the touch, even from feet away, and it smelled faintly of copper and decay. The figure knelt before him and opened the book. The pages inside were written in blood, not ink, jagged scrawlings in multiple hands, layered with symbols and drawings. Some were of people standing at the edge of the canyon with empty faces. Others showed anatomical diagrams, humans unspooling like thread, their memories labeled and cut away. Then Halloran saw her name, Lena Ward, a full page, centered. Below it, a date, April 9th, 2009. Underneath that, given. He looked up, throat dry. What does that mean? None of them answered, but one of the masked figures stepped forward and lifted his own mask. Halloran's breath caught. It was a ranger, or used to be. His badge was still visible beneath the hide robes, tarnished but readable, W. Stone. But his eyes, they were completely black, not blind, not lifeless, full of something ancient. Stone knelt, voice rasping like old leaves. She offered herself, to them, to the canyon. We don't take. We only keep what's been given. Halloran stared at the book, at the page that bore her name. She hadn't just disappeared. She'd been sacrificed. Or worse, transformed into one of them. And maybe she'd wanted to be. Mara crouched at the mouth of the gulch, breath hitching as she reached for the small, half-buried object glinting in the dust. A wristwatch, faded leather strap, cracked face. Stopped at 1:13 p.m. The third one she'd found in under an hour, the second one still ticking when she touched it, only to seize up the moment her skin brushed the metal. Red stood behind her, silent. His flashlight cast long, unnatural shadows over the canyon floor. Mara turned the watch over. On the back, a faint engraving, "For Elise, come home safe." She swallowed hard. There were 6 girls reported missing from the rim trail between 2003 and 2016, she murmured. Different years, different families, all hikers, all teenagers. Red nodded. All vanished without a sound. No prints, no remains. Just these. He gestured to the next rock outcropping, where another watch had been left in plain sight, balanced carefully like someone had placed it there on purpose. Mara stood slowly, her voice hollow. What are the odds they'd all stop at the same time? Red didn't answer. because they both knew the answer was none. She reached for her phone and opened the saved metadata from Halloran's last sat phone ping, 1:12 p.m., just a minute before. A chill crawled down her spine. "This place marks time," she said, "or breaks it." They walked deeper into the gulch, following the unholy breadcrumb trail of stopped clocks and shattered minutes. Each timepiece had a different band, a different face, but they all froze in unison, like the world itself had held its breath at exactly 1:13 p.m. When they reached the clearing, Mara stopped dead. A circle of watches surrounded a rock slab in the center, 12 of them, some children's, some adult, all ticking faintly as she approached, until she stepped into the ring. Then silence. The slab bore no inscription, but it was stained dark, fresh. Red whispered, almost reverently, "They call it the hour of shedding." Mara stepped forward, heart pounding. Whatever this place was, whatever had taken her daughter, it was waiting for the next name. Back at the ranger outpost, Mara's fingers hovered over the keyboard. The surveillance footage had been pulled from a corrupted memory card discovered in one of the old Canyon trail cameras, twisted with static, time-coded inconsistently. The first few seconds showed only rocks and wind, but the time code was familiar. April 9th, 2009, 1:13 p.m. Mara's breath caught. The exact moment Lena vanished. The same time etched across every frozen wristwatch they'd found. She entered the date as a password on the Digital Archive's decryption tool. A soft chime. Unlocked. A hidden video file emerged. No metadata, no origin. Only the name for Mara. Her hands shook as she double-clicked. Static. Then image. A young woman sat cross-legged against a canyon wall. Dirt smudged her cheeks and her hair was braided back with wildflower stems. Her eyes, God, those eyes, were Lena's. Older, weathered, but unmistakable. The camera was handheld, shaky. Lena leaned closer, as if trying to breach the screen itself. "Hi, Mom." Mara gasped. She hadn't realized she was crying until a tear hit the keyboard. "I'm sorry. I should have left a better trail. I just didn't know if it would matter, if you'd even... Remember me?" Lena looked down, drawing a spiral into the dirt beside her. "I didn't forget you. They said I would, but I didn't." She smiled faintly, sadly. "You always told me I was too curious, that I looked for doors in places they shouldn't be. You were right." A pause. Then she met the lens, and Mara's soul. "I forgave you." The words landed like a blow. "For that fight before the trip, for not turning around faster, for not finding me, for not saving me." Lena's voice cracked just once. "I forgave you the moment the wind took your voice away." Then the static surged again. The final frame, Lena reaching toward the camera, as if to touch her mother one last time. Then, black. Mara sat frozen, the echo of Lena's voice still ringing in her bones. She wasn't just searching for her daughter's body anymore. She was chasing her daughter's truth. And Lena had just opened the door. Mara stood alone at the canyon's edge. No search crew, no echoes of names, no calls through radios that only returned with static. Just wind. It howled softly through the crags, like it remembered too much. The memory card containing Lena's final message rested in her palm, warm, like it held a pulse. She'd watched the video a dozen times since she found it, memorized every blink, every tremble in her daughter's voice, every syllable of that parting confession. "I lived. For a while. That's enough." It was the kind of sentence a person only says when they know they're about to be forgotten. But Mara wouldn't forget. She couldn't. There had been no body, no grave, no conclusive end. But there was something stronger, a voice that crossed time, a message not trapped in the past, but sent ahead. Lena's forgiveness had cut through years of guilt Mara had wrapped herself in like a second skin. "I forgave you the moment the wind took your voice away." She closed her eyes, and she could almost feel her daughter beside her, barefoot, older, somehow lighter. Wildflower stems braided through her hair, laughing the way she used to as a child when she believed the canyon could whisper secrets to anyone brave enough to listen. Mara knelt and pressed the card into a crevice between two sun-warmed rocks, a final offering, not to be buried, but to remain. Then she whispered, "You lived. You were loved. That's enough for me." The wind shifted, and for the first time in 13 years, Mara felt the weight lift. Not gone, but carried. She stood, dusted her palms, and turned back toward the trail. Behind her, the canyon breathed, not in mourning, but in memory. Because some disappearances aren't losses, they're transformations. And the ghosts that matter, they don't forget. The new ranger post rose from red earth and sun-bleached stone like it had always been part of the canyon. A single-room structure, Spartan and quiet, perched above the hidden gulch where Lena's bracelet was found. It stood higher than the old outpost, farther from the trails, just beyond where the maps ended and the mysteries began. They called it the Watchtower, not because it watched for danger, but because it remembered. Halloran built it himself, hands roughened, fingernails chipped, every board and bolt laid down like a prayer, not for forgiveness, but for witnessing. He placed Lena's bracelet, weathered silver with a small turquoise bead, on the northern window ledge. It never moved, no matter how strong the wind. Each night, when the canyon turned violet and the sun drowned behind the distant buttes, Halloran sat in the silence. And sometimes he heard it. A hum. Software carried on the wind like breath between dimensions. It wasn't always clear. Sometimes a lullaby, sometimes just a note, stretching through time. But it was hers. He never spoke of it to the other rangers, not even Mara, who visited every spring, placing wildflowers at the base of the tower and watching the horizon until her eyes stung. Some things didn't need explaining. Some things just were. The canyon had taken so much over the years, youth, names, time, whole lives vanishing like mist. But it had given something back too. A kind of answer, not a solution, not closure, but something quieter, truer, more ancient than words. Halloran stayed through every season, watched storms roll in like bruises over the cliffs, listened to the wind hum old songs, cataloged the spiral carvings still appearing in places no one should have reached. He no longer believed the canyon simply took. He believed it transformed. And in the watchtower, with her bracelet glowing silver in the dying light, Halloran kept his final logbook, not in ink, but in memory, because in the places the world forgets, someone must remain, to listen, to remember, to watch,